Good morning. I know. It's one of those days, right? I mean, it's like the rain is like, I don't know, I don't want to do anything. And it's also cold, which gives me an excuse to wear the scarf. But thank you, thank you. Again, I want to thank our sponsors, Chancellor's Office, Kipuka, Center for Global Exchange, and Kilohana. And again, we want to encourage you to fill out the survey. There it is. I was like, where's the code? Fill out the survey code for today's session. You are in for a treat today. Regent Mike Miyahira is our newest regent of the Board of Regents for the University of Hawaii system. He's also director for multiple organizations such as the Japanese Chamber of Commerce, which just had their case of Hilo, successful, and the Hawaii Island YMCA. And today he's going to be talking about a very crucial topic to our local community, which is the challenges that family-owned businesses face. So let's hear it for Regent.
How many of you? Oh, right. Thank you.
Thank you.
How many of you are related to a family or part of a family that owns a business? Okay. So I'm going to be talking about the problems of family businesses, not necessarily your family's business, but some of the problems that family businesses often find themselves involved with. I found over the years that we need to look at four dimensions of family businesses. One is the relationships that they have with each other. Do they trust each other? And sometimes they don't. So we need to look at building those relationships if they don't exist. The second area of concern is in governance. How do they manage themselves? How do they govern their actions? How do they make decisions? Third area is succession planning. One of the blind spots with many family business owners that they never think about, one day I'm going to retire. One day I might have a stroke or health issue. One day I may not be around to run it. Who's going to run it in my place? So succession planning is another huge issue. And last area or blind spot I find with a lot of family businesses is they don't plan. They don't plan well into the future. They're good at looking at things tomorrow, next week, next month, maybe next year. But 5 years from now, 10 years from now, they're not good at planning long term. So strategic planning is one of those blind spots as well. And this is where I focus the kind of work that I do with a lot of family owned businesses. Common problems, again, poor or no succession planning. That's at the top of the list. I was talking with a family business owner. He was in his mid 70s. And I asked him, gee, when are you going to retire? And he said, retire? That's a strange word. It's not part of my vocabulary. Well, what happens if tomorrow that you can't come to our office? And he said, well, we're going to have a problem. And it was kind of late for him to think about succession planning. All his kids were like in their 40s and all had careers. None of them knew anything about the business. He had a problem. And he basically ran into a problem that's very common with a lot of family businesses. They have no next generation, or the next generation isn't properly prepared to take on the responsibility of ownership. Another problem that I see sometimes is conflict among the family members. You know, especially like if you have brothers and sisters, sibling rivalries. Sometimes you have situations where mom and dad always treated you better than me, kind of situations, and I've seen that a lot. Um, and so conflict does arise, and unfortunately, a lot of families are prepared to deal with conflict amongst the owners. I remember attending a board meeting, and the treasurer told me that his thoughts on one of the subject matters on the agenda. And the president, his brother, thought otherwise. But the treasurer didn't say anything. He was silent throughout the entire meeting. And I asked him, why didn't you say something? He said, it's easier just not to do anything about it. He didn't want to get his brother all upset. But I told him, you have a good point of view. You have an interesting perspective that needs to be brought out. And he said, well, Most of the times, if there's a problem, they'll deal with it later on. But he was avoiding the conflict. They don't know how to deal with conflict sometimes. And there are a number of challenges as far as governance is concerned. One is decision making. How are decisions made in a family business? Who makes those decisions? Oftentimes, it's one person. Is that necessarily right or best for the business? Who is the best qualified person to make that decision? Accountability. This is a huge issue with family businesses. Who's accountable? Who's responsible? Not that we're going to blame that person, not that we're going to crucify them or fire them or whatever, but people need to understand that they're accountable for the decisions they make and the performance that they provide. I remember one client, we were in a board meeting and they're reviewing contracts that they regularly issue to vendors, and one vendor happened to be a cousin. I asked them, because it was a substantial contract, I asked them, has that contract ever gone out to bid? And they said, why? It's so we contract with so and so. Are you getting a reasonable deal? No one knew. And of course, cousin's sitting right there at the board table, and he's throwing daggers at me. But at the same time, it's like, if you're giving them a reasonable deal, you should have nothing to be afraid of. So the family decided, okay, let's put out the bid. And they found out some very unpleasant truths about that contract. Accountability is so very important. And people are doing what's best for the business, what's best for the family. They shouldn't be afraid of it. Entitlement. Big issue with a lot of family businesses. What's entitlement? Any idea?
Thinking that something is automatically yours.
Yeah. Just because you're family, you deserve something. Like instead of driving a Versa, you should be driving a Lexus, right? You should have a new computer, all the techno gadgets that you can use. Okay. Yeah, that's entitlement. Entitlement really has no place in any business, as far as that's concerned. Then we have communication issues. What do you tell? What kind of information do you give to family members who are stockholders? I had one client that they didn't want to give out the financial statements to anybody except for the exec committee, and as a result, there was an issue with trust. Remember that the four circles? There was an issue with trust. What do you mean you don't want to give us that financial information? You don't trust us? No. Yes, it's confidential. Yes, it's important. We need to understand what's happening with the business. Communication issues really important, and of course, for strategic planning that we talked about earlier. Okay, so how do we go about building trusting relationships? One is and I recommend this to most of my clients, by following the principles of servant leadership. Now, servant leadership doesn't mean you do whatever they want to do. Servant leadership to me means you make decisions based upon what's best for everyone. So what's best for the business, what's best for the family. That's what servant leadership is. Decisions aren't based on what's best for me, but it should be based on what's best for everyone. Okay? Communicate openly and honestly and often. And it's something that most family businesses are not good at doing. How often do you tell the family about what's happening with the business? I encouraged one business recently to start this process of looking at succession planning. They held their first family retreat since the business started over 76 years ago. This is the first time that the rest of the family knew what was happening. No one knew the history. And of all places, we had it in Vegas. I said, why Vegas? Well, because we have property in Vegas. Oh, does the rest of the family know? No. So it was interesting it was an educational experience for a lot of the family. We even got to have a similar kind of business host them when they were in Vegas. So they got to tour another a business in Vegas. So it was a very educational experience with them. But communicating openly and often, very important for family business owners. Managing conflict. And so many different ways of managing conflict. And I think local style is you avoid it. Okay. Right? You don't want to make waves. But there are ways to talk about differences of perspective and opinion. And as a leader, as a servant leader, you are not doing them any service by not encouraging opposing points of view. So I encourage most business leaders, most business owners, to learn how to deal with conflict and differences in points of view. Okay, you shouldn't just shut people up, but you should encourage them and talk about these differences in open forum. It's very important, and I think in that process you get to refine actions, and you arrive at decisions which most people can support. Very important. Okay, don't avoid conflicts. And when you have families which are multi-generational, oftentimes you have different branches of the family. And what we encourage them is to look at each branch as being not separate by itself, but part of the larger family. And especially if you're like third or fourth generation, sometimes what you have is cousins here, cousins there, cousins here, and they don't necessarily talk to each other. And what happens is that you tend to then polarize different parts of the family. But if we could have a clan or major family outlook or perspective, and less of a branch outlook or one family against another, then it's easier, I think, to make decisions that affect the entire company. Transparency. This goes hand in hand with communication, right? You want to be transparent as much as possible. It's like running a university. We want to be transparent as much as possible. Some things are challenging, but most things, as far as what the company does, how it performs, should be available to most owners. Okay. Succession planning. Why don't more owners plan for succession? Yeah, it was always curious to me. Why don't more owners think about succession? Because to me, succession isn't just an overnight kind of thing. It takes years to really be effective at looking at who's going to be the next president or who's going to be the next owner. It takes years. So why aren't more owners planning for succession? And I think part of it is because this is hard work. This is really hard work. It takes time. Oftentimes, I was asking one guy, he was in his late 70s. His son was like in his early 50s. So, is so and so going to take it over? Yeah, my son, I don't know. Son and dad didn't get along. Son had different ideas. Dad thought differently. He was unsure if the son had what it takes. Well, dad lived till he was in his late 80s and passed away. Son took it over, and son's running it really well at this point. And until dad passed away, the son really couldn't do anything on his own. Too much work to get the next generation prepared. And that's, this is not, like I said earlier, this is not an overnight thing. Oftentimes, succession planning means looking at the next generation when they're very young. Someone asked me once, when should they start talking with the next generation or starting to indoctrinate or orient them into the business? And my suggestion to them was, well, at a point where they can start to recognize the importance of what the business does. It could be intermediate school, middle school, could be high school, definitely by college. Okay. And it doesn't necessarily have to mean understand the financials or understand the cycle of business, but it should be in terms of what does the business do. One of my clients had his kids start basically working in the business when they're in middle school. Come in, sweep the floor, file this, pick up the rubbish, come with dad makes a delivery, that kind of stuff. So the kids start to identify with exactly what the business does. One of them, he had two boys, about 4 years apart. Oldest boy became an engineer. Second boy became a program manager at a YMCA on Oahu. The engineer, when he was old enough, accompanied the drivers when they went to deliver product at a supermarket. So if nothing else, you just get the experience of what it takes. The second boy really wanted to get into the production side of the food. It was the food manufacturer. So he wanted to get into the production side. So dad took him to work one day. And in the afternoon, he said, I ain't going back. But it was an educational experience for both of them. So they understood. And frankly, now that they're all adults now at this point, they understand what the numbers on the financial statement mean and relate to. And as future owners of the business, they know they can understand what the business is all about. So it was an interesting way of trying to orient them, but it takes years sometimes. Sometimes next generation is not interested at all. Okay, and if that's the case, that's fine. Frankly, not everyone is going to end up in a family business, even if your parents were part owners of it. And in that case, we're fine. I think when you look at estate planning and those kinds of issues, you make other arrangements to take care of those kinds of kids. And nothing you can do about that if you're just not interested. Yeah, this is a famous one. I'm too old. I just want to retire. So I'm going to sell what I have, and that's too bad. And that happens more than I think is necessary. And there's oftentimes confusion that estate planning is the same thing as succession planning. It's not. Two different things. Estate planning is I have a pool of assets. What do I do with it when it comes time when I pass away, or frankly before I pass away? What kind of arrangements can I make to basically get rid of my estate? Succession planning is planning for the future of that business. Okay. What's going to happen to the business when I step aside? Well, two very different things. Okay. And sometimes it's really difficult for the current owner to step back. Really difficult. Like that 70-some-odd-year-old guy that's still working in the business, the son's in his 50s. He didn't want to stay home. Son told him, Dad, why don't you stay home, whatever. Come in when you want to. Come in, you read the newspaper, drink coffee, whatever. But customers used to call Dad and tell Dad, what's your son doing? So the next morning, he called his son and, hey, so-and-so. Another famous one, there was a brother and sister involved in the business. Sister was the accountant. And, frankly, it could be brothers. Reverse the situation, doesn't really matter. Just in this case, brother's president, sister's accountant. She had no formal training in accounting. And they never had current numbers, so he never knew if they're making money or not. And whenever he would complain to the sister go home. Sister would live with mom and dad. And she would tell mom and dad, brother's on my case again. Next morning, mom and dad called son and say, hey, don't give her that time. She's your sister. He never had numbers. He never knew what the business was doing. All he knew was what's in his checking account. Business is not around today. Yeah, sad. They even had to sell the property that they had for like 2 generations just to pay off the debts. Really sad. Some are poor planners. Like I said before, many of the small business guys really don't have the inkling to think about 5, 10 years down the road. A lot of them are more concerned with tomorrow, next week, next year. And frankly, they would be, I think, better off if they start thinking about, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where do I want to be? I was working with a client. This is over almost 20 years ago now. And we were talking about 10 years from now, what do you want your business to be like? And we had all these island managers in. It's a statewide retailer. And they were doing about 33 million a year in sales. Yes, one of the guys says, well, if we double in sales in 10 years, that'd be terrific. Everyone, yeah, that'd be terrific. 66 million in 10 years. So we went in the back and we calculated it out. That was 6% compounded each year. And if inflation's running 2 to 3%, that means you're really only growing 3 or 4%. That doesn't take much effort. In fact, a lot of times that can be done without even doing anything. Just move your prices up 3 or 4% a year. Okay? So we challenged them. We said it's not good enough. Doubling is not good enough. We said, okay, we want you to grow 4 times the size you are today. 125 million in 10 years. And they're all like crazy. There's no way. How are we going to do that? In 7 years, they were at 91. Today, they're about 150, 160. Okay. Today, they're at 4 states. And what got them there? This idea that if we plan for it and we think about goals and objectives that make sense, that we have the capacity to achieve, we have the people that can do it, maybe we can do that. And that's what they did. It's interesting, the same family was here, also with next generation. Our kids, I don't know, that 10 kids in the next generation. I don't know. Today, 3 of the 4 family members that were of retirement age have basically stepped back. Their kids are now on the board. We have one owner who's still in the 3rd generation. This is the 4th generation taking over. One of the 3rd generation owners still on the board, but he's set to retire, I think, next year. And his kids are shadowing him at this point. It takes planning. It took somebody to say, hey, what do you guys want to be 10 years from now? And that's where they got involved, all the next things that come up when you plan. And oftentimes, as far as succession planning is concerned, it takes mentoring, the one-on-one, the conversations that happen, oftentimes at the dinner table. And when you think about it, like my wife complains because I have dinner with her maybe 2 or 3 nights out of 5, and it's because we don't have time, and that's the biggest problem: spending time to talk about what's happening or what the kids should be thinking about or looking at. Yeah. So spending time to train and mentor the next generation, very important. And a lot of people complain that they don't have enough time to do that. So my recommendation to a lot of guys is start early, cultivate their interest in the business, even if it might be picking up rubbish or helping with deliveries or whatever it might be. Look at developing their business skills, their management skills. Okay. In a sense, business and management skills can be interchangeable. Because when we're talking about business, we're talking about leadership and management. And management skills is same thing, leading, teamwork, that kind of stuff. And exploring their leadership potential. Do they have the capability to lead others? one of the parents asked me, you know, how do we develop leadership potential? At what stage do we start doing that? What stage do we start the conversation? And my answer to them was, you start today. Even if your kids in elementary school or intermediate or high school or college, get them involved in activities and events. Get them involved in service clubs, service groups, not just to be a worker bee, but perhaps in charge of other people. You know, be in charge of a committee, be in charge of fundraising, be in charge of whatever. The challenge with leadership and management is, how do you motivate other people to work? And when you're in service clubs and school clubs and things of that nature, you don't pay them. So if you are an effective leader and manager, you know how to motivate people. Now, in business and in government and other places, we pay people, staff members, to do the work. But even then, if we're not effective in managing other people and leading them, it's going to be challenging. So we start kids early. You know, we want the parents to start their kids early and look at, are they able to lead and manage? Not everybody's cut out. Yeah. But for those that do, we want to help. We want to try and identify those with potential early on. Also, developing teamwork amongst the next generation of owners. Can the next generation work with each other? Very important when you think about family. You're continuing the ownership group in a business. And when it comes down to it, even amongst, like here at the university, can the various departments work with each other to produce successful outcomes? Same thing. We also want to pass along, in the case of a family business, the family's history. When that group went to Las Vegas, we charged one of the family members with the history of the company to let the kids know. In this case, it was the grandkids, and they're amazed. They never knew that grandpa and grandma were in a incarceration internment camp in California. They spent like two or 3 years there. They had no clue. And then eventually, we want the owners to think about who becomes the owner when it's time for them to pass that along. And our recommendation to them has always been, you pass along ownership to those that show the most aptitude with the business. Not just give every equal share to all kids, but for the kids that show an aptitude for an interest in the business, those are the ones who should be considered to be future owners of it. Doesn't always happen that way, but in that fashion, you basically I hope that what happens is then the kids who show no interest in the business don't have to be burdened by the responsibility of having to help run it. Okay. Another big challenge is, how do you encourage entrepreneurship? What's entrepreneurship? Any idea what's entrepreneurship? The get up and go, right? Somebody who wants to accomplish things, somebody who wants to be out there pushing things along, achieving things. That's basically entrepreneurship. But how do we encourage that? It's very challenging. But when we put kids into different scenarios, different assignments, give them different responsibilities, that we teach them, we mentor them. What do we mean by entrepreneurship? The challenge is, I think, encouraging to the point where it's embedded in the way they do things, their mindset, and we hope in that process that they become more capable in whatever their endeavors are in the future. We also need to prepare the rest of the company for the eventuality of the next generation taking over at some point. Just because they've been there for like the last 15, 20 years doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be status quo when we have new owners involved. So we need to prepare the management team for that. And the biggest problem when you have multi-generational companies is who gets to be the next owner, who gets to be the next president of the company, and what kind of process do you employ in making that selection, and who makes that selection. Yeah. So we need to talk about scenarios. We need to talk about processes and make sure everyone is in agreement as far as that's concerned. And the big issue, the big elephant in the room is, okay, now that you have so-called retired, will you really exit? Or you will hang around and interfere? Okay. So we want to develop exit strategies for current owners. What I always recommend is a gradual reduction in time, and interest in the business. And we try and schedule that geared with if they have retirement plans, when the retirement plans become effective. Say for example, for most people, the magic age is, what is it, 65 and a half or 67 and a half, Social Security? What is it? 67 and a half. That's the magic age when you start cutting back. And most retirement plans vest at 65 or 60 or something like that. So we want them to consciously decide or agree that at certain points in time that they should step back out of the daily operations. And for the large part, I would say most of them are successful. I had one client, they decided, there's just too many things going on. So we'll back it off to 70 and a half. I said, no, we'll go 68 and a half. You need to step back and let the other people, the next generation, step up. Otherwise, there's no end to this thing. Governance, big issue. How do you make decisions as a family? What we encourage is a collection of agreements that we label as a family constitution. It's like the Constitution of the state of Hawaii. It's like the Constitution of the United States. It's how we decide as a group to make decisions. Okay? So that's basically what it is. Major components, roles, and responsibilities. Who does what? Who can say what? Who makes decisions? Yeah, how decisions are made. And interestingly enough, respecting the boundary between owners and management. Okay. There's a very legal boundary between owners of a company and management, the people who work for the company. Okay. If you can think of an organizational chart, the owners are at the top, management's below them. Okay. Who makes decisions about hiring personnel? It's the management, right? Can the owners hire people? Management, right? It's a management function. If the owners step in and say, we want to hire this guy, then all of a sudden that boundary, that line has been crossed. And there's some very legal requirements as far as hiring and firing is concerned, right? And if the owners aren't respectful of that, then they assume personal liability for those kinds of issues. Reprimanding employees, same thing. Okay? Owners need to be very careful about that separation between ownership, being an owner versus being part of management. We recommend policies and agreements as far as employment of family members are concerned, compensation of family members, and performance and accountability. I was talking to Carla earlier about employment. How families make decisions as far as how to employ family members. And believe it or not, this is a big issue with a lot of family businesses, even compensation. and getting them to perform and be accountable. Big issues. Code of conduct, ethics. Very interesting. A lot of them don't have any sort of thing. So it's like, how do you, what kind of values do you have as an owner of the business? Can we codify that so everyone knows where you stand exactly on the issues? What's most important to you? And then enforcement. What do you do if a family member steps out of line? What do you do? I was talking to a family member, the president of a family corporation, fairly large, it's a multinational, and they had uh, two family members who sat on the board who are attorneys, and they wanted to handle all the legal contracts for the entire entire company themselves. They said they give the family a better deal, but they had no basis or no experience with legal processes and laws in like California, Tahiti, Japan, New Orleans, New Zealand, places where they're all involved with. What do you do in that case? It violated a lot of the policies that they had. In this case, the family bought their interests out and kicked them off the board. They were basically violating some conflict of interest issues. And there are other agreements that we can look at, owner agreements, buy-sell agreements, prenups sometimes, and also retirement, when to retire. Core values kind of relate to code of ethics and code of conduct. Hey, what's important? How do you think? How do you behave? And entitlement. Okay, governance. Big issue with a lot of companies, small family businesses. A lot of them don't even have boards. It's usually the owner and a spouse and one or two other family members. But really, getting a board to help companies would strengthen their ability to make wise decisions. It helped with looking at responsibilities and duties. And for those of them that don't have boards or don't want to go in that direction, my suggestion to them, as always, is to form an advisory board. It doesn't necessarily have a legal responsibility, but it can give them advice on different things. Family councils. This is where family members can come together, talk about what's happening with the business, maybe even tax planning, estate planning, all kinds of issues that might affect those who have an ownership interest in the business. And of course, family retreats, where we talk about everything under the sun. We want to educate family members about the business itself, about how to handle their personal wealth, and hopefully they have personal wealth and estate planning. Also, business concepts in terms of why are you in business? How do you manage the business? What's important in a business? How to resolve conflicts. I think the more people that are aware of how to deal with conflict, the better off the business will be. Okay, I know we're running out of time. Kobe's back there going, hurry up. So we'll whiz through these. Okay, strategic planning. I don't know if some of you have been involved in strategic planning. Oops, let me bring the back. So basically, benefits are looking at where you want to end up, rather, focus and direction. The more people you have in the process, the more likely you'll have buy-in by most people, because they have contributed their thoughts, their opinions, their perspectives in the plan that you eventually will arrive at. Big issue, mission. What's your primary purpose? Now, I ask that question of business owners. Why are you in business? What's your primary purpose? And I would say 80% of the time it's to make money. Okay? That's wrong. Profits of a company are the results, indirect benefit of running a business successfully. It doesn't say why you do what you do. So if you ask a plumber, why are you a plumber? Because you can make money in all kinds of different ways. Why are you in plumbing? And so people just like to do plumbing. They're good at it. You know, being profitable is just a indirect benefit of running it properly. So mission, purpose, very important. Knowing or understanding why you do what you do. Now, for most businesses, the founder of the business understood it and probably started the business because they liked to do what they did. But by the second or third generation, this is not clear anymore. Okay, but very important. Vision. What do you want to achieve? Usually longer term, 5, 10 years, maybe longer. Values, identifying what's important to you in terms of how you do business, how you conduct yourself, and then setting goals and objectives. Okay. It seems simple on paper, but the process is very challenging. Okay, we started with assessments, internal and external assessments. SWOT, I think most people are kind of familiar with that: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And in business, we throw in a few more. We want to look at market segments. We want to look at competition. We want to look at the use of technology and a few other kinds of assessments. We want to identify the big challenge. Okay, what's the big white elephant in the room? What is the biggest problem that you face as a business? And where are you in terms of integrating technology in your business? And do you encourage innovation? Strategy screening means as you look at the goals and objectives, you want to knock out those things that are just too far-fetched. Like I had one client, they did about 10, 12 million per construction. And we went through this process and we're talking about goals. And one of the owners said, we should set a goal of achieving $100 million in sales in 10 years. And everyone said, where are we going to get that from? On this island, there's just not that kind of business. So through a process of strategy screening, we threw out the ones that are just too far-fetched, and that was one of them. We develop action plans. And as far as the next generation, where do we go with that? Where do we go from here? What do we do with the next generation? How can we involve them in the planning process? Okay, so for those with ties with family businesses, there are some resources that are available. One great one is the Scheidler College of Business. We run a family business center for Hawaii. We even have a chapter in Hilo. We have a chapter on Maui, and of course the main business center is located at Manoa. Another resource would be other family business owners. Talk to them, get their perspective on things. Every business is a little different. Every family is a little different. There are publications that you can also get, either online or whatever. There are magazines. There are professional groups that service family businesses. And of course, there are consultants like me. Okay, but what we seek to do is address 4 primary areas with each family business. One is to build those relationships among family members so that they can have an environment where they trust each other. Second is look at how they make decisions, how they run the business. Third is succession planning, looking at who's next, who's going to run the business after my time is done. And the fourth is planning for the future. Right? Those are the 4 primary items that every family business owner should be concerned with. Okay, so Kobe.
Why don't we give the Regent another round of applause?